Thank you, Tom, for spending your time today to discuss outsourcing 4PL versus 3PL. Can you start by providing a brief background of yourself?
I have worked on what you can refer to as the shipper side in supply chain management, domestic and international, broad scope of responsibilities as to order processing, inventory management, warehousing, transport, domestic, international. And at some point, I decided, I was going to take that and started my own business with consulting. And that's what we've done. All of our people have real world supply chain experience, real world logistics experience. They've worked with carriers, shipper side, whatever it happens to be. We think that brings some unique perspective to what we do for clients.
Well, thank you. My first question is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing 4PL versus 3PL?
Basically, it depends what you want. I view the 3PL as the traditional model that's been around, where the parent company is some sort of transport company, forwarder, warehouse, and it's its core business, and it's expanded out into doing additional services for its customers. But the primary intent has always been to bring business to the mother company. So, in 4PL, to me, as a contrast, is a standalone supply chain service. And the key differences between the two are the 4PL is a neutral party. It's not there to bring business to the parent company. It's focused on, it has both a tactical and a strategic viewpoint, which often the 3PL does not have the strategic in particular. And basically, too, the 4PL versus 3PL, the 4PL is more of a manager rather than a performer of tasks. And also, the 4PL looks at the supply chain process as opposed to just the function itself. So those are the differentiations. The question, what you want, is what you particularly have for your outsourcing application. Traditionally, with many have gone to the 3PL because they get the most attention. The 4PL has gotten more work, more business, more visibility on the European side of the activity. There are, what you want, it depends, like I say, on what you want. But I find two interesting things, maybe three, going down the road. I find it interesting that some 3PLs are also positioning themselves or selling themselves as 4PLs. And if you remember the differentiations I gave you, they are sort of masking over those differentiations. But some major companies have given their business over to the 4PL branding of some 3PLs, which I find an interesting trend. I don't know if it's a trend, but something that's happened. How they can become a 3PL and be a 4PL, given the difference between the two types of business. The other thing I see happening down the road, too, is I see as a trend that supply chains are going to require greater diversity, greater flexibility. And the reason I say that, there's an ongoing discussion as to globalization versus onshoring, nearshoring, or what I call deglobalization. Will manufacturing move back to the States, move back to Europe, or wherever it happens to be? I don't see that as a major trend. I think globalization is here and will remain here. In fact, I see the next step as globalization going into emerging economies, be they in Africa or wherever they may happen to be. And that's going to bring on the complexity and diversity and the flexibility that's going to be required. Basically, managing a supply chain, a global supply chain, a truly global, is going to be a 24/7 requirement. People can say it already is a 24/7, but the expansion to some of these other areas is going to make that even more of a 24/7. And that's where I see the role also of a 4PL stepping up. To manage that type of global operation, you're going to need skill sets of a 4PL who has a supply chain focus, both strategic and tactical type of viewpoint. And in some cases, actually outsource the process and outsource the managing of that process to other parties. Because as the globalization increases, you're going to be dealing with more third parties spread over the globe, be they manufacturers, retailers for you, customers, wherever they happen to be, logistic partners. And so this is where I see a 4PL to step up without as much direction, requiring direction from the shipper to give to them. So it's down the road. It's a trend, been there. It gets on and off attention, but I think what I see is expansion into more of a global practice by corporations, even more of a requirement for the 4PL.
And can you talk a little bit more about why you'd want to outsource to a 4PL?
Basically, I would outsource to a 4PL if I just simply say, here's what I want done, here are the metrics, here's what I need to be done. And I need you to act as an extension of me. And that's where I see the 4PL. He's an extension of the shipper's logistics requirements department. He's not somebody whose main focus is whatever his parent company runs. So in essence, if you cannot have your own logistics organization somewhere in the world that you want, then this becomes a way to have your own logistics organization in an outsource environment where you do not have to have the same sit down, here's what I want you to do tomorrow, next week, next month. Instead, you're saying, here's what we've got to do. How do we do it? You've changed the conversation from giving orders to discussing the best way to manage what has to be done over the next quarter or whatever the time frame is.
And do you have any recommendations for people considering whether to outsource to a 4PL or a 3PL?
It depends what you want. It depends on your needs. Most people, if their requirements are more focused, limited in scope, that's not meant to be a negative when I say limited scope, then probably a 3PL is going to be what you want. If your requirements are more complex, what you need, then I would say look hard at a 4PL. That's the best way I can parse it apart and differentiate. It's based on the complexity and scope of what you're looking to